A dragon had taken in a bat as its pet, but the little bat refused to eat or drink. It prayed for a healing spirit to save its beloved companion. Instead, the magic circle summoned a man wrapped in a blanket. Kim Ojin opened his eyes, convinced he had finally worked himself to death. He had spent years grinding away as a veterinarian in the modern world. 6 years of studying, 3 years of internship. He had finally opened his own animal clinic. But business was dead, and the rent and loans were strangling him day and night. Every single day, he hovered on the edge of checking out of life, until this moment. Staring at the towering dragon in the dark cave before him, he was certain this was hell. He asked in despair what kind of torture awaited him, but the ice dragon only pleaded urgently for him to treat its precious child. Kim Ojin looked down to find that this so-called child was a tiny bat. It was frail, listless, and clearly in terrible shape. Professional instinct overcame his fear, and he began asking about its care. The ice dragon admitted it had only taken up bat keeping because it was trending among dragons lately. It had spotted one, thought it was cute, and grabbed it on a whim. A wave of all too familiar frustration washed over Kim Ojin. This was exactly the type of irresponsible, trend-chasing pet owner he despised most. Swallowing his irritation, he pressed further about the bat's diet. The ice dragon answered a little defensively, saying it offered fresh blood every day. Kim Ojin heard that and collapsed face first onto the ground. Of course, this was also the type of owner who never did their homework. He snapped, unable to hold back any longer. This is a fruit bat. It only eats fruit. Blood is completely indigestible to it. It's literally starving to death. And this freezing cave environment was only making things worse. The dragon was stunned into submission by his outbursts, its confidence completely deflated. Inwardly, it marveled. So this truly is the legendary healing spirit. Holding the barely alive creature in its hands, the dragon was overwhelmed with guilt. It carefully cradled the bat and offered a sincere apology. It promised to prepare fresh fruit immediately, and to return it to its original home. Kim Ojin was genuinely surprised. He hadn't expected a monster from hell to be so reasonable. The ice dragon said gratefully that it would reward him as promised. Kim Ojin didn't hesitate. He asked to be reincarnated as an oil prince, or reborn as a rich villain's son. The ice dragon had absolutely no idea what any of that meant in spirit language. It produced a necklace radiating magical energy and presented it to Kim Ojin. It told him he could use it to create whatever he needed, but only with pure intentions. After exchanging thanks, the ice dragon activated the magic circle to send him back. A blinding light surged, and only then did Kim Ojin realize something was off. This wasn't the afterlife. This was a genuine isekai summoning. He struggled and shouted, trying to get his wish across more clearly. He wanted to go back to the moment Bitcoin first launched, the starting line to wealth. But before he could finish, the magic circle's light had already faded completely. Kim Ojin found himself standing in the middle of a street, his heart drowning in regret and frustration. The thought of having wasted his one chance at a wish was agonizing. He should have asked for money or power on the spot, not some useless necklace. He couldn't help but wonder if that so-called god was a total fraud. Just then, someone barked at him to get out of the way. Kim Ojin looked up blankly. The buildings and clothing around him were completely foreign, nothing like his world. He was shoved hard by a passerby, and the very real pain told him everything. His heart sank. This was no dream or illusion. The god hadn't sent him home. It had dumped him here. A cheerful woman at a fruit stall called out to him, and he seized the chance to ask where he was. She mistook him for a lost traveler, and explained this was the territory of Baron Doyle. Kim Ojin felt all hope drain out of him. Then a sudden crash and commotion shattered the market's calm. A giant rabbit was brazenly devouring an entire carrot stand. People fled in panic. The woman warned him that was the Lord's pet. She urged him to hide quickly. Kim Ojin stared in disbelief, completely unable to accept that thing as a pet. Then, in the next second, he caught the giant rabbit's cold, predatory gaze lock onto the ground. A little girl sat frozen in tears, too terrified to move. The rabbit opened its enormous jaws, and she was about to be swallowed whole. Kim Ojin's mind went blank, but his body moved before his thoughts could. He sprinted over and snatched the girl away at the very last moment. His heart was hammering, fear choking the air from his lungs as death brushed past. The rabbit lunged again. Raw fury replaced the fear, and he erupted internally. This is the owner's fault? Bringing a wild beast out in public with no leash. The instant that thought crossed his mind, the necklace on his chest began to glow. In a flash, 2 leather straps appeared out of thin air and bound the giant rabbit. The other ends of the straps were gripped tightly in Kim Ojin's own hands. Everyone froze, including Kim Ojin himself, who had just narrowly escaped death. Whispers spread through the hiding crowd, speculating he was a sorcerer. He had absolutely no idea what had just happened. At that moment, a man in expensive clothing came rushing over in a panic. He was the Baron, the owner of the giant rabbit. Elizabeth. The Baron scolded his attendants for failing to keep watch over a single rabbit. But then he saw his beloved pet tied up, and his anger instantly turned on Kim Ojin. He demanded furiously to know who dared treat his precious that way. Kim Ojin calmly pointed out that the rabbit had nearly killed someone just now. The Baron refused to believe it, arrogantly insisting his darling would never do such a thing. Those words immediately ignited Kim Ojin's deep contempt for irresponsible owners. He gave a cold laugh and challenged the Baron to stick his own head in the rabbit's mouth and find out. The sharp remark drew quiet satisfaction from the watching crowd. Meanwhile, Kim Ojin began examining the rabbit more carefully. He noticed several unnatural bald patches scattered across its fur. Considering the breed and its behavior, a theory formed clearly in his mind. He spoke seriously. Unfamiliar environments cause enormous stress in rabbits. Fur pulling and aggression are abnormal behaviors triggered by that stress. The Baron was stunned. This stranger had just described his pet's recent condition perfectly. Kim Ojin pressed further, warning that if left untreated, the rabbit could have a shortened life. The words "shortened life" sent the Baron leaping to his feet in alarm. Kim Ojin suggested letting the rabbit get its exercise indoors, and finally he made his point firmly. You need to love your pet the right way. The words struck exactly where the Baron was most worried. He immediately saw Kim Ojin as a rare kindred spirit. What a stroke of fate, to meet someone who understood rabbits so well. Learning he was between jobs, the Baron signaled his steward to bring over a small pouch. He hoped Kim Ojin would look after his beloved rabbit's health going forward. With that, he rushed eagerly back to his giant rabbit, leaving Kim Ojin standing there alone, trying to process the sudden turn of events. The neighborhood folk swarmed around him, praising him for handling the rabbit situation. The fruit stall woman said she'd give him a discount from now on. Kim Ojin remembered the small pouch the Lord had given him. He hesitantly opened it and was instantly blinded by a glint of gold. He bit down to confirm. Pure gold, no question. His hands trembled slightly with excitement, his heart racing. A brilliant plan exploded in his mind. Open a veterinary clinic here. Use the gold coins earned in this world to pay off his debts back home. Night fell, candlelight flickering. Kim Ojin held interviews for his new clinic staff. He looked out at the hopeful, nervous faces before him, his heart full of possibility. Not long ago, the Baron had been enthusiastic about the idea of an animal hospital. He had not only provided funding, but even gifted him a 3-story building. It was crammed full of Elizabeth's merchandise, but free was free. The space was ready. What he needed now was one reliable veterinary assistant. The interview began. He asked the first candidate on the right to introduce themselves. Candidate number 1 gave a thorough account of their family background and moral character. Kim Ojin found them utterly unremarkable. Candidate number 2 confidently announced that their family had been in the animal industry for generations. When pressed, they admitted the family business was a butcher shop. Kim Ojin's internal alarm went off immediately. He mentally filed this one under threat. When number 3 stepped up, their eerie smile sent a chill down Kim Ojin's spine. He tried to look past appearances and asked why they'd applied. Number 3 abruptly snapped. They started raving about searching for the legendary sorcerer, even begging Kim Ojin to use them as a doormat, and then lunged at him. Kim Ojin stumbled back in fright, regretting ever having had any hope. Just as he was struggling to break free, a woman in a hat calmly spoke up. She asked if the director just needed this nuisance removed. Without waiting for an answer, she sent number 3 flying with a single punch. She then introduced herself with a casual pat on her shoulder. Selena. She claimed to be an expert in stray animal management with extensive experience. Kim Ojin's eyes lit up. He gave her a perfect score without a second thought. And just like that, he hired an assistant with extraordinary combat ability. A new day, warm sunshine. But Kim Ojin's mood was steadily sinking. It was nearly 1 in the afternoon, and his new assistant was nowhere to be seen. He smiled wryly. Clearly, he hadn't thought things through yesterday. As he was figuring out where to post a new job listing, there was a knock at the door. He patiently went to answer it, half expecting it to be his no-show assistant. Instead, a stranger in a hat stood outside. Kim Ojin immediately switched gears and welcomed the guest in warmly. This was the very first customer at location number 2. He had to make a good impression. He knew exactly why location number 1 had failed his temper. Back then, whenever he encountered an irresponsible owner, he simply couldn't stop himself from being sharp and sarcastic. The bad reviews poured in, and the clinic never recovered. This time, he was determined to charm the customer's wallet open. The guest pointed to his pocket. There was a lizard inside. Kim Ojin was relieved it was at least a normal animal, but he couldn't help wondering why anyone would carry a pet in their pocket. The customer answered excitedly that it just looked incredibly cute that way. That answer made Kim Ojin want to flip the table. He fought to keep his temper in check, silently repeating, "Stay calm, stay calm." He took a deep breath and asked what exactly was wrong with the lizard. The customer said Posha had been very weak, sensitive to cold, and had lost its tail. Kim Ojin patiently explained that all of those were perfectly normal traits for a lizard. The customer, however, insisted. He wanted his pet to be stronger. Kim Ojin decided to run a health check on Pocha first. He felt around the abdomen and found signs of incomplete shedding. The customer then casually mentioned the lizard had come from the streets and could be a bit feisty. Before Kim Ojin could react, he watched flames begin to seep from Pocha's mouth. Then a blazing fireball began to take shape. At the very last second, a strong hand grabbed his collar. His new assistant Selena yanked him out of the way of the fireball. She quipped that it would be a real inconvenience if her boss disappeared on day 1. Kim Ojin was embedded in the wall, aching all over, unable to respond. He thought grimly that getting hit by a fireball might have actually hurt less than this. Selena turned and asked the customer seriously where the fire lizard had come from. The customer said proudly that he'd found it behind the mountain. Selena immediately pointed out that hunting fire lizards was banned in this territory. They were nearly impossible to tame, and illegal poaching had made them extremely rare. The customer panicked, asking if just keeping one was also a problem. Selena stated clearly that any form of possession was illegal, but if it was treated and released immediately, no one would pursue the matter. The moment the customer heard he'd have to part with his pet, he bolted for the door. Kim Ojin had just pried himself out of the wall when he saw the customer making a run for it. He demanded to know where on earth the man thought he was going, and couldn't understand how Selena could just stand there and let him leave. He ordered Selena to get that customer back, now. Selena took one look at his expression and gave in. The fruit stall woman was quietly minding her shop, relieved the Lord's rabbit hadn't shown up to cause trouble. Then the sound of frantic footsteps shattered the calm from behind. First came the customer, sprinting in a complete panic. Selena came charging close behind, and then Kim Ojin came huffing and puffing after Selena. All three blazed past the fruit stall like a gust of wind. The woman was brimming with curiosity, but her instincts told her not to ask. The fleeing customer was in full mental breakdown, unable to fathom why they were being chased. He ran with tears streaming down his face, convinced this was some kind of test. Nothing could tear them apart. Kim Ojin shouted from behind that Pocha desperately needed to shed its skin. The sun began to dip lower. The chase had gone on for the entire afternoon. Kim Ojin finally caught up to Selena, barely able to speak from exhaustion. Selena told him dryly that he could use the exercise. Then she turned serious and asked if the fire lizard's incomplete shedding was really that critical. Kim Ojin confirmed it. 2 or 3 layers of dead skin had built up inside. She explained that if a fire lizard fails to shed, the flames inside begin to accumulate. When the buildup reaches a breaking point, it loses all control. And when that happens, it won't just be the owner at risk, the entire area could be leveled. Kim Ojin felt the full weight of it and urged them to find the two immediately. Back at home, the customer had convinced himself he'd lost them. He set Pocha on the table and let out a sigh of relief, touched by their unbreakable bond. A melody was already forming in his head. He didn't notice at all that Pocha's body had started to smoke. Then, an explosion erupted directly behind him. The force of the blast knocked him off his feet. He scrambled up to find Pocha standing at the center of raging flames. He reached out in disbelief, asking why it was angry and spitting fire. He extended his hand carefully, trying to coax it away from the danger. But Pocha had completely lost control and unleashed a ring of fire straight at him. In the nick of time, Selena burst in from the side and pulled him to safety. Kim Ojin moved fast and grabbed hold of the blazing Pocha with both hands. He demanded loudly whether losing control meant attacking its own owner. Selena called out urgently. It had gone fully feral. They needed to calm it down immediately or the fire would only grow. Kim Ojin stared at the out-of-control Pocha, feeling completely at a loss. In desperation, he shouted that he needed a fire extinguisher. The moment the words left his mouth, the necklace on his chest flickered. A fire extinguisher materialized in his hands out of thin air. No time to be surprised. He aimed and sprayed it directly at Pocha. White foam blanketed the fire lizard and the flames were immediately suppressed. He gave it another blast for good measure, thinking, this necklace actually works. The fire consuming the room gradually died down as well. Selena checked on the customer, whether he was hurt, but the customer brushed it off completely. Instead, he smiled with something like relief, saying he finally understood why Pocha had attacked. He figured if he took better care of it going forward, this kind of thing wouldn't happen again. Kim Ojin stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Something this dangerous had just happened, and that was all he had to say? The customer shrugged cheerfully. Houses can always be rebuilt, and his feelings hadn't changed. Kim Ojin finally snapped and yelled, what if someone innocent had been hurt? Did it only matter because he personally was fine with it? He laid it out clearly. You cannot keep a wild animal just because it's cute. These creatures have natural environments where they belong. If you know nothing about their needs, that love is nothing but selfishness. The words finally landed. The customer lowered his head in shame. Pocha looked up at him with wide, glistening eyes, full of attachment. Kim Ojin said quietly that love alone is not enough to sustain a life. The customer fell silent, and it seemed like the message had sunk in. They headed out to the forest to release Pocha. After shedding successfully, Pocha had grown noticeably larger. Kim Ojin remarked that it looked so much healthier. Selena marveled at how it had ever fit inside that old skin. Only the customer looked miserable, convinced Pocha no longer needed him. He held back his tears and let it return to nature, rambling about coming to bring food every day, telling it to be happy. Kim Ojin cut him off immediately. That would only strip away its wild instincts. Before the words had even settled, Pocha had already vanished into the depths of the forest. The customer broke down on the spot. He hadn't expected it to leave without a single glance back. Selena tried to console him, explaining that fire lizards simply have no concept of ownership. At best, it might remember you as the one who fed it. Just then, Pocha reappeared at the top of a tree, looking down at them. It launched a massive fireball into the sky. The fireball detonated with a boom, and a brilliant burst of fireworks lit up the entire sky in an instant. The customer looked up with tears rolling down his face, but this time, they were tears of wonder. He laughed and said, "That's my Pocha, all right, incredible." And with that, the whole ordeal came to a warm and luminous end. Afterward, the customer, a traveling bard, turned the whole experience into a song. He performed it in the town square, singing praises of Kim Ojin as a healing spirit. The lyrics were wildly exaggerated and embarrassingly over the top, leaving Kim Ojin cringing in secondhand embarrassment. He muttered under his breath that he had no idea what good a song like that would do. Then he overheard the crowd saying they were going to visit this animal hospital. Kim Ojin's expression did a complete 180, and he burst out singing the praises of music. Once the jingle spread, a line formed outside the clinic that never seemed to shorten. Selena looked at the packed waiting room and seriously floated the idea of quitting. Patients spilled out the door, the queue stretching all the way to the corner. Kim Ojin dragged himself through each goodbye, visibly worn out. Selena remarked dryly that at this rate he'd collapse before anyone else. He rallied himself and called for the next patient. He was going to earn every coin he could while he still had the energy. 1 month into opening, his reputation brought in a steady, endless stream of clients. But every time he saw the generous payment, every ounce of exhaustion evaporated instantly. He even broke his own rules and saw patients after hours, just to squeeze in one more. He noticed that people here loved cats and dogs just as much, only the breeds were startlingly unusual. An extra-long dachshund and a cat with multiple eyes were just a few of the sights that left him speechless. He rolled his sore neck and shoulders, finally seeing the last patient of the day. Selena informed him it was a Salro hound, a breed of hunting dog that had recently become fashionable, but the abandonment rate was shocking because of how aggressive they could be. Kim Ojin felt a familiar wave of disgust. He wished every trend follower would just disappear. Selena warned him that this breed could pierce wild boar hide, handle with care. He braced himself for something ferocious. Then the customer pulled out what looked like a cotton ball. It was a 3-month-old Salro hound puppy. The owner said it had been limping since yesterday. Kim Ojin carefully took it into his hands, found a small thorn lodged in its paw, and pulled it out cleanly before disinfecting the area. The puppy immediately bounced around with pure, delighted energy. Watching that fluffy little ball of joy in motion, he found himself smiling without thinking. Selena noticed it was a rare expression on him. After seeing the satisfied customer out, he slumped forward onto the desk, complaining about how exhausting the work was. Selena said he actually looked happy. Was it because of the cute animals, or simply the satisfaction of getting the job done? Kim Ojin was quiet for a moment, then answered softly, because no one was seriously hurt today. As a vet, the hardest part of the job was watching animals suffer. The more you loved them, the heavier that helplessness became. It was why he used to lash out at irresponsible owners. Now he just tried to shut out the feelings, using coldness as a shield. He straightened up and announced they were closing, telling Selena to hurry and pack up. He turned around and came face to face with a miserable expression pressed against the glass. The person outside called his name in a ghostly moan, pleading for help. Kim Ojin jumped in fright and asked Selena if she knew any exorcisms. The person looked like they were about to climb through the window, so he went over to check. He was immediately grabbed and dragged through the window into the woods. Selena stood frozen, watching helplessly as he was pulled into the trees. Deep in the forest, the person kept apologizing. He introduced himself as Shuba, a government official. He managed the territory and had heard that Kim Ojin once saved the Lord's rabbit. He needed help capturing a stray dog that had taken up residence on the mountainside. Kim Ojin frowned and declined. Vets treat animals, they don't catch them. Selena appeared out of nowhere and made it equally clear that they weren't a rescue squad. Shuba looked like he was about to cry. He said construction was set to begin in 2 days. If the dog wasn't caught before then, the military would come in and shoot it. The word shoot made Kim Ojin go still, his chest tightening. Shuba bowed deeply, telling him he was the only one who could help. Kim Ojin went silent, a fierce internal struggle underway. Finally, he let out a breath and asked where the dog was. He made clear that he was a vet and needed to assess the situation first. Shuba was overcome with gratitude. Selena watched Kim Ojin and quietly understood he'd already made his decision. Shuba pointed up the mountain path and said the dog had been there all along. Just then, a deep and menacing bark erupted from the depths of the forest. A dog with sharp fangs stepped into view. It stared at the newcomers and let out a low, threatening growl. Kim Ojin tensed immediately and confirmed the breed with Selena. Selena nodded. It was indeed an adult Salro hound, the same breed that had recently become popular and was now being abandoned in droves. The Salro hound kept its eyes locked on them. Kim Ojin looked at its gaunt, skeletal frame and felt a pang of sorrow. Then a strange sound rang out from somewhere in the trees, breaking the silence. The Salro hound erupted into furious barking and charged straight at them with terrifying force. Selena reacted instantly, yanking both of them out of harm's way. Kim Ojin caught his breath, but argued that turning tail and running from an excited hunting dog was the worst strategy. It would only fuel the dog's instincts and make it chase harder. But then something unexpected happened. The Salro hound stopped halfway through its charge. It didn't press the attack. It just stood there panting heavily, then turned and trudged listlessly back to where it had been resting. All three of them exchanged baffled looks. The behavior made no sense. Why would an excited hunting dog give up the chase from that close a distance? Shuba began griping about the villagers down below, who had been complaining nonstop for days. They all said there was a mad dog on the mountain, too dangerous to be left alone. But Kim Ojin's mind locked onto one critical detail. He immediately asked, had any of the villagers actually been bitten? Shuba froze. He thought about it carefully and realized not a single one had. Kim Ojin felt something click into place. He turned to Selena for confirmation. Was it true that Salro hounds were known for extreme loyalty to their owners? Selena nodded, sensing he was onto something. The next day, They didn't go straight for the dog. They went into the village first. Selena didn't understand, suggesting it would be faster to just lure it with food. Kim Ojin shook his head. He needed to find the dog's original owner first. If it were truly starving, it would have taken the bait long ago. A hunting dog that could resist its own hunger had to be holding on to something more important, like the last command its owner had ever given it. He pictured the moment the owner had left, the final parting words, "Stay here, don't move." A chain it simply couldn't break. Selena thought of the same image, the heartbreaking scene of abandonment. Kim Ojin's voice dropped, weighted with suppressed anger. If they found the kind of owner who would do that, he was going to make them answer for it. They went door to door through the village asking about the dog's owner, but the villagers were nothing but annoyed and dismissive. Everyone hated the dog. No one knew a thing about who it belonged to. They came up empty and crouched wearily by the roadside. Then a woman quietly approached them. She said softly that she knew they were looking for Jack. This was the first time anyone had ever come looking for the dog's owner. She led them to a small, secluded cottage at the edge of the village. Kim Ojin knocked, no answer. He was puzzled, but the woman pointed to the side of the house. There stood a small, plain headstone. Kim Ojin went completely still. Every assumption he'd made crumbled at once. The woman explained gently that Jack had passed away 2 months ago, taken by a landslide. He had lived alone, with no family. She was the one who had buried him. The villagers had all been cursing the owner who abandoned the dog, but Jack had never abandoned Max. He simply couldn't come back. She had tried to bring the dog home herself, but nothing had worked. She begged them, please, help the dog named Max. The truth hit Kim Ojin like a blow to the chest, leaving him breathless. A wave of deep shame washed over him for the assumptions he'd made. He turned to face the headstone and bowed slowly, with full sincerity. Then he made a quiet, firm promise. He would bring Max home. But as evening fell, an unplanned crisis arrived without warning. Shuba came running in a panic. The military had arrived at the mountain base ahead of schedule. He tried to reason with them, suggesting they rest for the night and move in the morning. But the officer in charge patted the rifle in his hands, dismissive. He saw no reason to delay. It could be dealt with today. Everyone hated the dog anyway. Getting it over with was better for all. Meanwhile, Kim Ojin stepped into Jack's room. The air smelled of herbs. He guessed Jack had probably been an herb gatherer. He asked Selena to look for anything that carried the owner's scent. His own gaze was drawn to a framed photo, and he stopped moving. In the picture, Jack had his arm around Max, smiling with complete and unguarded joy. How could someone who loved a pet this much have left his dog out there alone? Then Selena pointed at something on the wall, a drawing. Jack had been searching for a mandrake. Selena explained, a rare screaming plant with extraordinary value, the ultimate dream of every herb gatherer. Kim Ojin suddenly remembered that strange, eerie sound he'd heard in the forest. Pieces began fitting together in his mind, forming a shape he hadn't expected. Outside, rain was beginning to threaten. Max suddenly became restless. It remembered that day in the rain with Jack. Jack had built a fire and told Max to wait. It'd stop soon. Max, soaked and shivering, had huddled into a ball. Jack wiped it down gently with a towel, careful and tender. Glad he'd thought to bring one. He told Max not to wiggle around or it might catch a cold. Max licked the droplets from his hands. Firelight danced in the cave as the two of them found quiet in the rain. Jack was relieved to have found this shelter, but then his eyes caught on something in the corner of the cave, a strange glow, a shape of leaf he'd never mistake, the herb that existed only in books, a mandrake. Joy overwhelmed him completely. He had to go home immediately for the proper collection tools. Max started to follow, but Jack gently held it back. He told Max to stay in the warm cave and wait. Home wasn't far. He'd be back before long. And with that, he ran out into the rain, feeling like it was his lucky day. Max stayed behind, obediently watching the slowly dying fire. Jack ran through the downpour, heart full of dreams for the future. Then from behind him came a sound, not thunder. A catastrophic landslide churning with mud and rock came crashing down. He didn't even have time to cry out before the earth swallowed him whole. The fire inside the cave had long since gone out. Max still sat facing the entrance, waiting for its owner to return. The rain passed, a rainbow stretched across the sky, but that familiar figure never came. Day after day it refused to leave, stubbornly holding its ground. It wasn't until a week later that a villager finally discovered the hollow-eyed dog. People assumed it had been heartlessly abandoned by its owner. A few kind souls tried to offer it food, but were driven back by its low, warning growl. People grew impatient and decided it deserved to be left behind. Max ignored everyone and retreated back into the cave to keep waiting. Until this day, when what finally came was not its owner but the barrel of a gun. The soldiers carried tranquilizer rounds, debating whether the dosage was sufficient. Shuba tried frantically to stall them, saying someone had already been called to help. He pleaded that the dog had never hurt anyone, and there had to be more to the story. The soldiers cut him off coldly. Their duty was to protect the residents, not to listen to a dog's story, no matter how pitiful it might be. The gun was raised, aimed at Max, who had no strength left to run. At the very last second, Selena's hand closed around the barrel. She told them to hold off, because help had just arrived. At that same moment, Max's nose twitched sharply. It caught a scent. Its owner's scent. Its tail, which had been hanging low, began wagging in a wild, frantic frenzy. Kim Ojin walked forward slowly, crouching down in front of it, wearing Jack's coat. He quietly apologized and told Max he wasn't the one it had been waiting for. Then he gently stroked its head and told it he was taking it home. Deep in the forest that night, a young deer was running in blind terror. It stopped, gasping for breath, but the shadow followed without pause. A pair of golden eyes glowed in the darkness, locked onto it. Then a piercing cry split the silence of the trees. The next morning, Kim Ojin's clinic welcomed its first patient of the day. He stared at the hamster, which had somehow become perfectly spherical, and said nothing. The diagnosis was simple. It had eaten itself into immobility. He sighed and advised the owner to manage its diet, then called the next patient. Old friend Shuba walked in with a smile on his face. He brought news of Max. After being taken home, Max had struggled to accept that Jack was gone, but Shuba had been patient and attentive, and eventually Max came around. This visit, however, was about a different kind of problem. His attendant opened a box to reveal a mandrake plant inside. Selena immediately noticed its roots were exposed and something was clearly off. Shuba explained that Jack had been the one to find it, so it counted as part of what Jack left behind. Since being transplanted, it had been shrieking day and night in a grating, unbearable pitch. The surrounding residents were at their wits' end, unable to get any peace. Selena speculated that the plant was extremely sensitive to its environment. Shuba seized the opportunity and slid the plant toward Kim Ojin, asking him to take care of it. Kim Ojin refused immediately, stating he was a veterinarian, not a botanist. Shuba argued back that this noisy thing was far from any ordinary plant. It was neither plant nor animal. It was practically a demon. Just then, the mandrake began to stir awake. Everyone bolted in a panic. Kim Ojin looked back at the abandoned plant, feeling both ridiculous and annoyed. Selena, however, mentioned that its roots, stems, and leaves could all save lives on the brink of death. Kim Ojin still felt that a rare herb no one could control was completely useless. Before he could finish his thought, the mandrake woke up. They frantically covered their ears. The dreaded shriek they expected never came. Instead, it let out a cheerful, chirping trill. Kim Ojin was completely thrown off, unable to figure out what had changed. Selena noticed the plant seemed very interested in Kim Ojin specifically. She suggested he try holding out the magic necklace. The moment the necklace appeared, the mandrake began wriggling with excitement. Kim Ojin was thoroughly put off. It reminded him of some creepy sunflower toy. Selena made the decision on the spot. It would stay in his room for the time being. Late that night, frantic knocking jolted him out of sleep. He dragged himself to the door, bleary-eyed, and announced that after-hours visits cost extra. The visitor was clutching a badly injured puppy, begging him to save it. The wounds were deep, the bleeding wouldn't stop, and Kim Ojin felt momentarily helpless. Selena reminded him that mandrake leaves could stop bleeding quickly. Kim Ojin asked Selena to go and pick one, but the mandrake flatly refused her. Selena told him to come do it himself. He sucked it up and asked, as politely as he could, if he could have one leaf for an emergency. The mandrake responded by coyly brushing against its leaves, then plucked one off with a certain flair. Kim Ojin was too disgusted to even reach out and take it, but when the leaf was pressed against the wound, the bleeding stopped instantly. The client left with endless thanks. Kim Ojin could finally go back to sleep. Less than half an hour later, an even more urgent round of knocking broke the silence. This time it was a young deer, its wounds strikingly similar to the puppy's. Kim Ojin concluded they had been attacked by the same animal. But this wasn't hunting. The wounds suggested the attacker had been toying with its prey. It was the behavior of something deeply disturbed. The others looked confused and asked what on earth deeply disturbed was supposed to be. A little girl named Pio stepped forward and named the culprit. It was the wolf kept by Baron Doyle. He often brought it into the forest to terrorize smaller animals. Kim Ojin was startled. He hadn't expected the perpetrator to be a nobleman. He raged internally at the filth of this feudal class system, but knew there was nothing he could do. A week later, another deep-of-night cry for help dragged him out of bed. Kim Ojin had reached his absolute limit. He couldn't take it anymore. He organized a protest. Residents gathered outside the Baron's manor with torches in hand. The crowd chanted and condemned the Baron for his cruelty to animals. Kim Ojin shouted the loudest, demanding the Baron put an end to the violence. The gates of the manor swung open. Soldiers stepped out, their expressions flat, and asked who Kim Ojin was. His stomach dropped, bracing for the worst. Then, to his complete surprise, the soldier bowed to him respectfully and escorted him inside. Even more unexpected, the Baron's fearsome wolf had been gravely injured. The Baron himself was sobbing like a child, begging Kim Ojin to save his wolf. Kim Ojin stared at the scene, utterly speechless. A new wave of panic unlike anything before had gripped the village. People whispered to each other, claiming a terrifying creature had appeared in the western forest. The rumors kept escalating, from attacking animals to threatening to devour humans next. In the midst of the dread, someone loudly proclaimed that the Baron had already launched a campaign against it. They praised him for setting traps and running patrols day and night, the hero protecting the village. Kim Ojin couldn't hide his disdain, remembering what had actually happened that day. The so-called hero had been rolling on on the ground throwing a tantrum, screaming for revenge. It was his exasperated subordinates who had organized the whole hunt themselves. Selena noticed his expression and quietly asked what he'd figured out. Kim Ojin laid out the inconsistency. The injured animals recently had all appeared on the eastern side of the forest. Only Margma had been attacked deep in the distant western forest. Yet the Baron's search was focused entirely on the west, which made no sense. Selena agreed, and added that the western forest already had a reputation for strange and unsettling stories. Ordinary villagers had no desire to go anywhere near those dark and foreboding trees. Just then, the craftsman behind them called them over excitedly to see the finished products. 3 carefully crafted syringes gleamed under the lamplight. He introduced them proudly as the pinnacle of his craft, then complained in the same breath that they'd been an absolute nightmare to make and he would never do it again. Kim Ojin immediately pulled out a heavy pouch of gold coins. The craftsman's attitude flipped on the spot, and they struck a long-term partnership. With that settled, the designs for more modern medical equipment moved to the top of the agenda. 4 bottles, tubing, measuring instruments, and even hospital cages for recovery. Kim Ojin divided the clinic into separate functional zones, leaving Selena genuinely impressed. He felt quite pleased with himself. This was the wisdom of modern medicine at work. At that moment, the herbs Selena had ordered arrived right on cue. She walked through each one with practiced familiarity, describing its special properties. Some could induce deep sleep, others were powerful painkillers. One even treated cancer. Kim Ojin's jaw dropped. These effects were far beyond anything he knew. The supposedly advanced modern man had just been humbled by ancient knowledge. Then Pio came bursting in, announcing excitedly that the terrifying creature had finally been caught. A harrowing howl echoed through the air. The Baron arrived with a large armed escort treating it like a battle. Kim Ojin felt a knot of unease in his chest. The sound was genuinely fierce, nothing like an ordinary wild animal. Then someone shouted that the creature had broken through the trap and was making a run for it. The powerful hunting dogs were unleashed, driving the target deeper into a dead end of the forest. In the shadows, something glowed. Everyone held their breath, but what the torchlight revealed was a small black cat. Its fur was standing on end, claws out, teeth bared, but its eyes were filled with nothing but fear. The soldiers exchanged glances and awkwardly noted that it appeared to be a stray cat. The Baron, however, was absolutely certain it was the one. He pointed to his own listless wolf as proof. He accused the cat of having wicked claws and teeth, calling it the root of all evil. Kim Ojin felt his stomach turn. This whole scene looked like a bully crushing something defenseless. Before he could react, a net had already dropped and pinned the small cat down completely. The Baron ordered it bound with iron chains and heavy shackles to be taken alive. The crowd roared with enthusiasm, demanding it be executed in front of everyone. Kim Ojin's chest tightened. This was nothing but cruelty. He thought of the stray dogs he had treated, covered in wounds, and felt a tremor of grief and anger. Those who abused animals were the one kind of person he despised most in this life. Watching the cat be tied up, he made up his mind to fight back, on their terms. He bellowed for everyone to cover their mouths and noses. The crowd looked at him in confusion. He pointed to the M-shaped marking on the cat's forehead, and declared it the mark of a demon, warning that it would trigger a worldwide plague. The plague, he said, always begins with rats. A cat that is fed on infected rats becomes something far more dangerous than the rats themselves. A carrier that could bring about total annihilation. The crowd was shaken by this terrifying claim. They had never heard anything so bizarre and alarming in their lives. Someone muttered that this felt like being taken for a fool. The Baron's expression went serious. He turned to Kim Ojin and asked if this was true. Kim Ojin kept his composure with great effort and claimed he had witnessed this catastrophe firsthand in his homeland. It had been a war between the world and a plague. The Baron pressed him. Was this cat truly a demon? Kim Ojin nodded immediately, but then he shifted his tone and said that because it was still young, there was still a way to contain it. Its blood, combined with certain ingredients, could be used to make a medicine against the infection. As he spoke, he was desperately shooting Selena urgent looks. Selena inwardly sighed, but played along and affirmed his story. Kim Ojin's heart was in his throat, terrified the Baron would see right through it. Sure enough, the Baron's attendant spoke up against it, calling the whole thing laughable. But the Baron gave Kim Ojin 1 week to purify the demon. Back at the clinic, Kim Ojin finally let out a long breath. He sincerely thanked Selena for playing along, complimenting her natural talent for deception. Selena corrected him flatly. What she had said was not a lie. Cat blood combined with mandrake could indeed be used to make medicine. It was just that the amount of mandrake required would run into the hundreds. She then asked him why he had bothered to save this animal. Kim Ojin finally explained it was not the one behind the attacks. He laid out his records. The wounds on all the other animals were nearly identical. Only Margma's wounds were entirely different, made by a separate creature entirely. Selena immediately understood it was Margma who had been attacking the livestock, and this cat had attacked only one animal, Margma. But Kim Ojin pointed to what he found strange. The Baron's behavior didn't add up. He had previously covered for Margma, so why this sudden crackdown? This whole disorganized hunt could very well be aimed at the cat specifically. Selena agreed. The fact that the Baron wanted it alive rather than shot was the clearest proof. But what troubled her more were the scar on its forehead and the old injury on its leg. Kim Ojin swore he would find out exactly what had happened to it. Selena was quietly moved by that. Her opinion of him shifted, just slightly. Then, in the very next second, she watched Kim Ojin bury his face into the cat's fur without a shred of dignity, letting out a deeply contented sigh. Whatever impression she'd just formed, she immediately took back. She decided he was simply unhinged. The next morning, a spine-chilling wail poured out of the animal clinic. Passing villagers jumped in fright, speculating wildly about what was going on inside. Word soon spread through those in the know. The doctor was purifying the demon. The villagers nodded in understanding and cheered the name of the great sorcerer. The truth inside the clinic was that Kim Ojin was struggling pathetically to feed the small cat. The cat showed zero appreciation and raked its claws across his face in response. Selena, however, made an observation. The cat's body had noticeably shrunk since a few days ago. She theorized that its magical energy had been depleted, causing it to physically diminish. Kim Ojin was worried. It had gone 3 days without eating, locked in a vicious cycle of hunger and aggression. He muttered that it would be perfect if there were some magical energy-infused meat paste right about now. The moment that thought crossed his mind, the necklace on his chest burned with heat. The necklace flared with light. A stream of meat paste shot directly into the cat's mouth. The ferocious little creature turned docile on the spot, lapping it up obediently. Kim Ojin was overjoyed, cooing and fussing over it like a proud parent. Selena watched, and despite herself, the corner of her mouth curved upward. Then the M-shaped mark on the cat's forehead began to glow faintly. Selena's eyes went wide. She understood in an instant. Of course, this was no ordinary cat. In legend, the unicorn lion was a divine beast of boundless magical power. Its horn could bestow blessings upon all living things, and just as easily decide the life or death of any human. As the world's magical energy faded, they had chosen to take on a smaller, compact form, but the pride at their core meant they would never submit to being kept by a human, with one single exception, the one known as the healing spirit. At this moment, that healing spirit was beside himself with excitement, beaming with satisfaction as he watched the legendary divine beast, Kim Seonja, finally learned to use the designated bathroom corner. As a reward, he tenderly fed it its favorite meat paste. Selena quietly mourned the divine beast's apparent fall from grace. That night at the Baron's manor, news brought back by a spy sent a ripple of shock through the room. The Baron simply could not believe it. That proud divine beast had allowed itself to be fed. They were supposed to sooner die than accept food from human hands. The thought made him recall the plague Kim Ojin had so gravely described. An unease settled in his chest. This man was anything but ordinary. The next morning at the clinic was, for once, running smoothly. Pio greeted each patient with warmth and efficiency. Kim Ojin watched it all and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet contentment. He found himself thinking back to the days when Selena was the only help he had. That assistant was either angering the clients or vanishing without explanation. When he'd finally had enough, he'd ask Pio, who lived nearby, to come in. Pio wasn't just competent, she had a genuine and heartfelt love for animals. Kim Ojin was so taken with her that he nearly offered her a permanent position on the spot. It was then that he noticed the clinic was unusually quiet today. The animals that usually made noise without pause were all sitting perfectly well behaved. What he didn't know was that it was the pressure radiating from Kim Seonja on his shoulder keeping them in line. Then the client with the obese hamster came back for another visit. This time, the pet had somehow grown even rounder than before. Kim Ojin reflexively called it a hamster, and the client immediately looked doubtful. In this world, a hamster was called a flopier. The client began to question whether this doctor actually knew the creature in front of him. Pio stepped in smoothly, covering for him with quick thinking. She explained that the doctor came from another world and practiced a completely unique form of medicine. Kim Ojin was so delighted that he officially offered Pio a permanent position right then and there. Kim Ojin continued the examination. Behind him, Kim Seonja fixed her gaze intently on the plump hamster, and then lunged. But in the split second before her claws made contact, something astonishing happened. The fat hamster split into three perfectly identical copies. Everyone in the examination room froze. This world had just upended Kim Ojin's understanding of reality once again. After the initial shock, the client dissolved into overwhelmed happy tears. He had always wished his pet could have a family, and now, somehow, it had come true. The 3 new hamsters wriggled in his arms, then scattered in every direction, blurring around the examination room like afterimages. Thankfully, Selena arrived back in the nick of time, and caught all of them with impressive skill. She identified them, not flopiers but bullroos. She placed the 3 creatures in a cage and said they would need thorough study. Kim Ojin hurried to calm the shaken client and safely saw him out. After closing time, Selena explained the true origin of bullroos. They were a byproduct of a failed magical experiment. The last time she had encountered one had been over 100 years ago. Kim Ojin was struck with awe, and a faint chill ran through him at the same time. At that moment, Kim Seonja suddenly pricked up her ears, highly alert. An instant later, a rapid knocking rang out. A voice outside, calm, authoritative, leaving no room for argument, announced that Baron Doyle himself had arrived in person. The Baron demanded the demon be handed over immediately. Kim Ojin's heart plummeted. He had originally planned to buy time and hide Seonja, but had gotten distracted and forgotten. All he could do now was force an awkward smile. The Baron repeated his order impatiently, telling him to bring the creature out at once. Kim Ojin claimed the treatment wasn't finished yet. He said that during the purification ritual, he and the cat had formed an inseparable bond. The absurdity of this made everyone present think he had lost his mind. He knew it wasn't working, which meant it was time for a direct confrontation. He suddenly turned the tables and demanded to know why the Baron was keeping a similar black cat in his manor. He accused him point blank of planning a swap. The Baron's face changed. He scrambled to deny it. Kim Ojin pressed his advantage, exposing the real culprit, the wolf the Baron had been keeping. The Baron held his composure and told him to prove it. Kim Ojin had come prepared, producing the medical records documenting the wounds in detail. But in the next instant, the evidence was torn to shreds in one of his attendant's hands. Kim Ojin shook with rage, internally screaming about the desperate need for technological advancement. The Baron's men lunged for the cage, and were immediately rewarded with a deep scratch from Seonja. Kim Ojin's mind raced, frantically thinking about what the necklace could conjure. Had it really come to that? The necklace was already glowing faintly on his chest as he prepared to make his last move. Then a cool, commanding voice rang out and brought the chaos to a halt. A group of beings with an extraordinary, otherworldly presence swept in, stopping everyone in their tracks. The Baron looked toward the newcomers. The sight of the world tree staff in their hands gave him pause, and the rings of magical energy circling their brows. He recognized them instantly. This was the leader of the highest oversight body on the Western continent. The Baron snapped into a bow, his tone shifting to fawning deference in an instant. Carlian stated the purpose of their visit. They had come for the endangered divine beast. Kim Ojin immediately became the world's most starstruck fan, eyes shining with admiration. He also instantly understood what Selena had been disappearing to do these past several days. Looking more carefully, he could just make out a pair of pointed ears beneath the brim of her hat. Carlian spoke an incantation. Kim Seonja became drowsy almost immediately. She was then wrapped in a cocoon of soft glowing air and lifted gently upward. After his examination, Carlian confirmed that she was indeed a precious unicorn lion, and the scar on her forehead was proof of having been cut by a magical extractor. Someone had forcibly extracted magical energy directly from a divine beast, which filled him with fury. He turned on the Baron and demanded to know if he was the one who had severed the divine beast's horn. The Baron went pale with terror, collapsing into incoherent denials, then fled with his entourage in complete disarray. Kim Ojin felt tears well up in his eyes. This world's animal protection organization was absolutely incredible. Carlian thanked him for protecting such an important divine beast, and informed him they would be taking Seonja into their care. Kim Ojin felt a pang of reluctance, but he also knew it was the right thing. Just then they noticed Kim Seonja actively tearing through the protective membrane. Within moments she had broken free, and launched herself straight into Kim Ojin's arms. He caught her with a surprised laugh, warmth and trust flooding between them. The tender scene left every elf frozen in silent wonder. Carlian's gaze fell to the glowing necklace on his chest, and he grew thoughtful. The elves began murmuring among themselves, their eyes lighting up with curiosity and something close to excitement. That look, it reminded Kim Ojin of the professor who had pressured him to pursue graduate school. Even Selena was looking at him the same way, which made his skin crawl. Carlian smiled suddenly, and announced he would entrust Seonja to Kim Ojin's care. Technically, regulations required both the person and the divine beast to be brought back to headquarters for review, but with Selena present to oversee things, they were satisfied. Carlian spoke another incantation. A halo of light settled over Kim Seonja. A new necklace, woven with protective magic, appeared around her neck. It would stand in for her lost horn and help her recover her strength. Then Carlian produced a ring and offered it to Kim Ojin. It carried the power of his family's lineage. It could call for help when danger came. He smiled and moved to place it on Kim Ojin's finger himself. Kim Ojin's face went red immediately. The ring was a perfect fit, and the elves broke into warm, pleased applause. The first ring of Kim Ojin's life, and it had come from an elf. He explained that as a doctor, wearing jewelry would get in the way of his work. Carlian was unusually insistent, but seeing how uncomfortable he was, Carlian cast one more spell. The ring dissolved into a blue-green mist and settled on the back of his hand as an elegant tattoo. Kim Ojin stared at it in disbelief, and had to admit it looked surprisingly cool. Carlian instructed him to press the tattoo close to his heart, and after quietly speaking the incantation, the tattoo resonated with the distant staff. They could actually communicate remotely through it. Then he tried speaking the word light, and the tattoo lit up like a flashlight. Kim Ojin forgot every protest he had made moments ago and broke into an excited, gleeful dance. He thanked the elf from the bottom of his heart. Then Carlian asked where the necklace had come from. Kim Ojin told him honestly, it was a gift from a dragon. The words made Carlian's eyes go wide. The dragon clan had been extinct for 1,000 years. Was this man perhaps 1,000 years old? Kim Ojin waved his hands in frantic denial and explained the whole strange story. He had simply been summoned by a dragon to treat its sick pet bat. As payment, he had been given the necklace, and then mistakenly sent here instead of home. But when he finished, every elf in the room had gone very, very still. Then, all at once, they dropped to their knees and called out the title, Healing Spirit. Kim Ojin was completely lost, unable to understand this sudden reverence. He insisted desperately that he was just an ordinary human being, accidentally summoned to the wrong place. but Carlian took both his hands firmly and slowly told him about the crisis threatening the world. Since the dragon's extinction, the world's source of magical energy had been rapidly running dry. Many sacred creatures had already disappeared as a result. All of life was under threat. Their organization had been formed for one purpose alone: to find the one spoken of in legend. And in that legend, the one who wears the necklace carrying a dragon's power, that was the one who carried hope. Kim Ojin went blank. Was this legend actually talking about him? The elves knelt again, swearing to dedicate themselves entirely to the protection of the healing spirit. A headache settled in behind his eyes. This was all that dragon's fault. The next day, the clinic opened as usual. A client came in with her flying fish, visibly distressed. Kim Ojin examined it and determined the fish had simply grown too old to fly. The client struggled to accept it, tears gathering in her eyes. She described through choked words how the fish had been her father's most beloved companion, and the very gift he had given her mother when he proposed. Kim Ojin thought privately that proposing with a fish instead of a ring was a bit much, but Selena confirmed that it had genuinely been a romantic trend in the past. The client described nights long ago when flying fish lit up the sky in glowing schools, as beautiful as stars. After her mother passed, her father fell ill and never truly recovered, keeping only the fish for company. All the others had faded away. Only this one, Lumi, could still fly. Her father had said, if Lumi can no longer fly, his life is over. Kim Ojin thought this uncle was being a little too dramatic. Selena, in her most analytical tone, suggested simply buying a new flying fish as a replacement. The client's pleading voice pulled Kim Ojin back. She just wanted Lumi to fly again. He looked at the fish before him, healthy but aged, and felt genuinely torn. He kept explaining that what they were seeing was natural aging, but the owner had staked all her hope on this one creature. He had dealt with situations like this in the modern world too. Owners whose emotional states were completely intertwined with their pets. He always had to stabilize the owner before anything else, and that was often harder than treating the animal. Just as he was wrestling with it all, a sound came from behind him. He turned, and a crowd of elves surrounded him, chanting healing spirit. Kim Ojin jolted awake from the strange dream. Kim Seonjia was curled up, sound asleep on top of his blanket. He arrived at the clinic the next morning with heavy bags under his eyes. Pio admitted she hadn't slept well either. She'd been thinking about what Kim Ojin had said about the flying fish aging, and wondered whether the real reason was something he hadn't said out loud. Perhaps it was this world's steadily thinning magical energy. She shared what the elders had been saying, with a troubled look on her face. First, the flying fish stopped glowing. If the magical energy continues to deplete, eventually they will lose the ability to fly altogether. Kim Ojin felt a jolt of recognition. It was like what he knew as environmental degradation. Without meaning to, his mind drifted back to what the elves had said about him being the one to save the world. Selena joined the conversation and confirmed that unexplained illnesses in animals were on the rise. On the surface, they looked like aging, but the root cause kept pointing to the same thing: magical depletion. The most undeniable proof stood right in front of them: a unicorn lion who had been reduced to the form of a cat. Kim Ojin looked at Kim Seonjia, quietly grooming herself, lost in thought. Then something clicked. He asked about the specific condition of the flying fish owner's father, then followed up by asking what the standard treatment for that kind of illness typically involved. Selena named several herbs, ones used for healing and for managing pain. He asked whether any of them had side effects from long-term use. Selena noted that bloodroot herb dulled the nerves over time and completely drained a person's energy. Kim Ojin's eyes lit up. He immediately asked what could counteract those side effects. Selena answered by tilting her head towards something behind him. Kim Ojin turned. He found himself looking at the proud, upright silhouette of the mandrake. Kim Ojin softened his approach and asked the mandrake for a few leaves to use as medicine. The mandrake let out a cold huff and turned its head away with a snap. He reached out to take some anyway. It erupted into a shriek sharp enough to pierce eardrums. Everyone clapped their hands over their ears in a panic. In the end, they had no choice but to forcibly make it stop. Kim Ojin was both startled and furious, scolding it for nearly bursting everyone's eardrums. Pio, however, spoke up on its behalf. It might be upset from being neglected. All of Kim Ojin's attention lately had gone entirely to Kim Seonjia. Pio suggested that maybe giving it a name would help. Kim Ojin said there was no need, at which point the mandrake actually started to cry. He felt the pressure immediately, unable to believe he was being held hostage by a plant's feelings. Left with no good options, he blurted out a name on the spot: Kim Mansuk. The mandrake stopped crying instantly. Its branches and leaves began quivering with excitement. It even plucked 2 leaves off on its own initiative and handed them over, perfectly cheerful. Selena watched all of this quietly from the side, deep in thought. She suddenly asked if she could borrow Kim Ojin's necklace for a moment. After putting it on, she stroked both Kim Seonjia and Kim Mansuk at the same time. Both reacted with clear resistance. It turned out they weren't drawn to the necklace's magic at all, they were drawn to him. She pressed him on exactly how he triggered the necklace's power. Kim Ojin described it, he had to concentrate deeply, until he felt a faint ache in his chest. Selena began to think about the connection between the dragon's power and the heart. She watched him feeding his own magical energy to the unicorn lion like handing out snacks, and couldn't help but wonder whether this method was far too dangerous. Pio had already ground the mansuk leaves into a fine powder. They began gathering everything needed for the house call. Selena's gaze never left Kim Ojin. Was this man, Kim Ojin, truly the healing spirit? The next day, Ruriel came to bring medicine for her father, only to find him collapsed on the floor. She rushed over in a panic and helped him up. Fred explained weakly that he had only wanted to show Lumi the view from the window. His daughter sobbed and scolded him. His bones were fragile, he had no business getting out of bed. But he only murmured with quiet resignation that he didn't have much time left anyway. Those words completely shattered what little composure Ruriel had left. She begged him out loud to stop talking that way. Fred just shook his head with a bitter smile, saying it was a broken heart that would be the real end of him. Just then, Kim Ojin arrived with the others. He said that death comes from mistaken understanding and the wrong prescription, and even more so from poor habits and neglected health management. He introduced himself as a veterinarian and identified the cause of the flying fish's condition. The reason Lumi could no longer fly was the medication Fred had been taking. Fred couldn't understand the connection. Kim Ojin explained patiently, flying fish retain their aquatic instincts. They lick and groom the things they are most fond of, and because of this, they had been ingesting the residue of his medication through his hair. Fred objected in disbelief, insisting he had never once seen them do that. But Ruriel broke down and told him what he never knew. Every night after he fell asleep, the flying fish would quietly tend to his beard and hair. Fred finally understood why his whiskers always seemed to shimmer and gleam. Kim Ojin then produced the remedy he had prepared. He promised that within a day or two of the injection, Lumi's strength would return. He began administering the treatment to each of the 3 flying fish in turn. With Pio's help, even the most resistant ones were seen through. The medicine took effect quickly, and the flying fish grew drowsy. Before long, the one called Lumi began to flutter its wings. With everyone holding their breath, it slowly, tentatively lifted into the air. Fred was overcome with tears, reaching out and calling its name. The scene was so beautiful it felt like a dream. Kim Ojin reassured them that the others would recover just as quickly. Nothing to worry about. But just then, one of the flying fish suddenly leapt up and bit him. Right after, another one bit into his hair. Kim Ojin yelped in pain, completely baffled by the attack. After biting him, both fish began trembling violently, as if in great distress. And then, before Fred's astonished eyes, something extraordinary happened. The scales and bodies of the flying fish suddenly burst into a soft, radiant glow. The light grew and grew, filling the entire room with something that felt like a waking dream. Kim Ojin and Pio both stood with their mouths open in wonder. Fred was completely absorbed in the light, memories rising up from decades past. It had been in a glow just like this, many years ago, that he had brought the woman he loved to see these flying fish for the very first time. In that same dreamlike light, he had gathered his courage and proposed. Now, holding the glowing fish in his hands, tears rolled freely down his aged face. Kim Ojin gazed at the scene and felt genuine awe. It truly was extraordinary. Pio finally understood why flying fish had once been a proposal gift. Only Selena stood apart, calm, observing everything. His blood and his hair had been enough to make the flying fish glow and fly again. But she still wasn't sure. Was he truly the one spoken of in the prophecy? She had asked Carlian directly about this. Carlian, however, was certain. Everything aligned with the prophecy. Selena had argued that the important ring should not have been given to him. Carlian only smiled serenely, saying the ring's master would approve. He believed the unicorn lion's choice was the clearest evidence of all. Word of the healing spirit's appearance, he said, would spread across the world before long. Selena suddenly understood. Letting the Baron go had been deliberate, to let the news spread. Kim Ojin was being used as bait. Carlian acknowledged it. They were waiting for the truth behind everything to surface. He gave his word that Kim Ojin would not be put in any real danger, and he added with quiet significance that the elves' presence here was no coincidence. Selena thought back to the first time she saw Kim Ojin. He had been subduing the giant rabbit. She had noticed the necklace around his neck even then, and felt a pull of curiosity. She acknowledged he was unusual, and yet she still couldn't bring herself to accept who he might be. Carlian reminded her, the prophecy concerning the healing spirit had never been about something as simple as saving the world. The scene shifted, and a scream rang out from the animal clinic once again. The bullroo that was supposed to have been discharged last week had reappeared. Selena announced that she would be taking this one under her own care. She explained calmly, this species comes in 2 types, nucleated and non-nucleated. As long as the nucleated core is kept under control, the rest will not continue to divide. Kim Ojin went pale. That meant they could multiply without limit. Selena warned him to be careful because stress would cause it to split. Kim Ojin refused on the spot, demanding she return the dangerous creature immediately. Selena shot that down without hesitation, insisting that its behavior needed thorough study. In the past, a lack of understanding had caused an entire village to be consumed by them. Kim Ojin was nearly at his wit's end. This was like playing playing with matches in a munitions depot. He already had 2 forces of chaos living under his roof. He couldn't handle another. P.O. asked, with some concern, whether the original owner had given their consent. Selena glanced over and asked, with unsettling calm, whether consent was really required for something like this. Kim Ojin understood immediately. She had just taken it outright. P.O. grabbed his arm quickly and whispered a warning not to push back. Apparently, elves left marks on the ears of serious criminals. Many elves kept their ears hidden specifically to conceal those marks of punishment. Kim Ojin was horrified. Was that the elven equivalent of an ankle monitor? He thought back on all the times Selena had acted first and explained, never mentioning her past. His internal alarms went off. What exactly had she done? A terrible thought surfaced. What if it was murder? He started to seriously consider whether he should let her go immediately. Selena turned and reminded him that clinic hours had started. The thought of the potential danger made him lean toward making a change. But when the front door opened, the crowd packed outside stopped him cold. Pet owners were calling his name urgently, their arms full. P.O. was working hard to maintain the line, handing out numbered tickets. One look at the scene, and Kim Ojin changed his mind without another word. At the same time, the atmosphere inside Baron Doyle's castle had turned ice cold. A man demanded sharply to know why the Attilawan order had come. The Baron explained frantically that they had come for the divine beast. He'd had no choice but to flee. The man erupted in fury, berating him for letting the unicorn line be taken away just like that. The Baron rushed to reassure him. The unicorn line was actually with a Dr. Kim Ojin. The man refused to believe it. A divine beast willingly living alongside a human? Impossible. The Baron swore he had seen it himself. The unicorn line had been following the doctor of its own accord. The man's expression turned sharply serious. He asked who else knew about this. The Baron ticked off the names, a couple of subordinates, his steward, and a few others. The man asked whether their silence had been secured. The Baron froze. For the next hour, furious roaring echoed through the castle walls. Under enormous pressure, the Baron immediately ordered those 2 subordinates to be summoned, but his steward reported back that the 2 had been overworked and were currently on leave. They had already left. There was no way to reach them. A deeply unpleasant premonition seized the Baron's chest. Meanwhile, the news of the healing spirit was spreading at a breathtaking pace, in taverns, barracks, market squares, and school courtyards. Everyone was asking, who was this Dr. Kim Ojin? Why had the Attilawan order descended upon a backwater village? The rumors eventually climbed to the parlors of noble ladies, sparking a new wave of imagination. The legendary healing spirit was actually a man? The ladies exchanged glances full of excitement. This was nothing like what they had pictured, and the prophecy had once said, he who wins the healing spirit shall rule the world. In the Montbelier district, where the nobility resided, Dr. Adrian arrived fashionably late. He looked around his empty examination room and wondered why there were no patients today. His steward told him not a single one had come through the door since morning. Adrian's first instinct was that a rival was behind some underhanded scheme to sabotage him, but his steward said it was because of a new animal clinic that had opened in the Belmore area. Adrian was dismissive. The tricks of a commoner doctor weren't worth a second thought. With aristocratic arrogance, he decided to treat it as a day off. He still had his noble clientele after all. He brought up the young lady's unicorn, which alone was enough to secure a month's income. His steward then informed him that a message had just arrived. The young lady had canceled her appointment. She, too, had gone to Kim Ojin's animal clinic. The mask of arrogance on Adrian's face finally cracked. He could no longer sit still. He had to go see for himself exactly what kind of place this was. Adrian came from a distinguished family, handsome and learned. In the eyes of the world, he was the picture of privilege. But very few people knew the real reason he had chosen to become a veterinarian. It had nothing to do with love for animals. It was to get close to their beautiful owners, easing the worries of elegant ladies. In his eyes, this was the finest calling in the world. Yet Lady Marian was his one exception. From the moment she first walked into his clinic, his heart had beaten for no one else. He sometimes thought he had perhaps become a vet for the sole purpose of caring for her unicorn, and now she had entrusted Lulu to a commoner doctor. The news stripped away all pretense of composure. He declared the clinic closed on the spot. He had to go to the Astrald house immediately and find out what was going on. Faced with the lady of the house's questions, he produced a string of high-minded sounding concerns, questioning the competence of a commoner physician, insisting that Lulu's delicate temperament required attentive care. But the lady calmly cut him off, mentioning that the doctor was a woman, not only exceptionally skilled, but possessed of an elf-like, breathtaking beauty. Adrian went completely still, a stream of flattering images flowing through his mind. A warm, golden-haired beauty, or a cold, dark-haired ice queen. He drifted deep into the fantasy, until the lady mercilessly informed him it had been a joke, purely to witness the amusing reaction of a man with such obvious weakness for women. Adrian scrambled to defend himself, insisting he was absolutely not someone ruled by such impulses. He was simply, purely, hoping hoping to marry Lady Marian. This far too honest confession earned him an immediate escort to the door. On the carriage ride back, he resolved to go meet this Dr. Kim Ojin in person. He was confident he knew unicorns better than anyone. He understood their sensitive, particular nature intimately. They despised the smell of a man's sweat and the scent of blood. They only drew near to what was clean and fragrant. After suffering more than a few embarrassing incidents, he had finally found the trick. Before every appointment, he bathed, fasted, and applied the same signature perfume. A commoner reeking of the streets would provoke Lulu and cause an incident for certain. He would then appear like a savior and win back everything. He pictured both the lady and the unicorn turning to depend on him alone, and couldn't hold back a laugh. When he arrived at his destination, the commotion in the crowd told him the unicorn was already drawing a spectacle. He felt a private flicker of satisfaction, convinced the commoner must already be making a fool of himself in front of everyone. He pushed his way through the crowd, and what he saw made his jaw drop. The man called Kim Ojin was sitting on Lulu's back laughing freely, and Lulu wasn't resisting at all. She looked remarkably calm, even content. Lady Marian stood nearby, marveling that this was the first time Lulu had ever carried someone outside the family. Adrian's face went rigid. He was certain there was some kind of trick involved. His suspicion turned toward the elf Selena standing nearby. He guessed it must be magic, but in the very next moment Lulu turned and bit down on Selena's arm. That ordinary reaction of rejection was actually proof that no magic was involved. Kim Ojin was immediately on edge. He called an end to the session and announced he needed to treat Selena's wound. The crowd dispersed. Adrian's frustration reached its peak. He had to find out what method this man had used. He climbed the tree outside the clinic window, as nimble as he had ever been. Through the glass, he watched the wound being treated inside. The technique was unusual but clearly effective, which he had to privately admit surprised him. Then, just as he was watching, he caught a glimpse of a faint marking on the man's wrist. He looked more closely. His heart nearly stopped. That was unmistakably the mark of the Celestian family, the seal of the highest Elven bloodline. Why would it appear on the wrist of someone who looked like an ordinary commoner? Just who exactly was this Kim Ojin? Selena's wound was burning. Unicorn saliva left a stinging poison on contact. Kim Ojin treated it carefully, relieved that the toxicity was not severe. Both of them found it strange. The unicorn's hostility had come from nowhere. Marian apologized again, sincerely and with evident distress. She promised to cover every cost of the treatment without question. Marian then noticed how familiar Selena and Kim Ojin seemed with each other. When she learned that Selena was his assistant physician, her expression shifted to one of quiet understanding. She looked around the clinic, and with a touch of regret in her voice, said it felt a little small. A space like this, she feared, might not give Dr. Kim Ojin room to fully realize his abilities. The words landed on Kim Ojin in an unexpected way. A small, quiet ache stirred in his chest. He found himself thinking of the even smaller and more worn-down private clinic he had once kept. Marian saw his silence and immediately realized she might have said the wrong thing. She apologized quickly, calling herself thoughtless and ignorant. Then she said that Dr. Kim Ojin deserved the very best environment for his work. Something like a large, fully equipped hospital with her family's complete financial backing. Kim Ojin's heart skipped a beat. The offer had come out of nowhere. Marian leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping as if sharing a confidence. But just then, Lulu let out a sharp whinny that shattered the delicate moment. She squared off against Kim Seonjia, and the clinic dissolved into chaos. Once the animals were calmed, Selena was puzzled. It was common knowledge that unicorns disliked humans but were naturally drawn to other small animals. They were especially well suited to unicorn lions in temperament, and the two typically got along with ease. Yet Lulu's behavior contradicted all of that completely. Marian took offense and asked sharply whether Selena was calling Lulu badly behaved. She accused Selena of being rude. Selena fired back that Marian had cut in line. Marian insisted indignantly that she had properly purchased her numbered ticket, though the price she'd paid for it was one most people would find very difficult to refuse. In the midst of the argument, Lulu grew agitated again, rearing up with a cry. She lurched sideways and slammed into a nearby bookshelf. The heavy shelving crashed to the ground. At that same moment, the window shattered, and a figure came flying in, and the falling bookshelf, Selena caught it with one hand, holding it steady without flinching. The intruder hit the floor. Everyone froze. The man looked up and his gaze went straight to Marian. He got to his feet and asked urgently if she was all right. Pio demanded angrily to know why he had smashed through the clinic window. Adrian smoothly swapped in his most charming smile. He introduced himself as an animal doctor by the name of Adrian, and gracefully took Pio's hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. Kim Ojin watched from the side, internally exhausted, as if watching a stage performance. He couldn't help asking why a doctor had seen fit to enter through someone else's window. When Adrian turned toward him, every trace of warmth vanished from his face. He coldly declared that he was Lulu's rightful physician. He accused Kim Ojin of being a shameless opportunist who had left Lulu in a weakened state. Kim Ojin was furious at the baseless accusation, and pointed out that Adrian was the one who had broken in. Adrian insulted him using a peculiar plant name that implied incompetence. After a quick whispered explanation from Selena, Kim Ojin learned it was a term for a hypocrite. Marian was even even more incensed, and rebuked Adrian sharply for his disrespect. But Adrian insisted his accusations were not unfounded. He pressed Kim Ojin directly. Did he have a fiancée, or had he ever been in a relationship with a woman? When Kim Ojin said no, Adrian became agitated and called him a liar. He said the marking on Kim Ojin's wrist belonged exclusively to an ancient family. It signified either bloodline or a marriage contract. Pio guessed excitedly that it was an engagement ring. Kim Ojin hastened to deny it, explaining it had been given to him by a man named Carlian. The explanation only deepened this understanding, and the atmosphere grew even more peculiar. Just then, Lulu let out a cry of pain. She suddenly began to retch, then collapsed to the ground, limp and barely conscious. Kim Ojin called to Pio to bring the instruments. While he checked Lulu's pupils and breathing, his mind racing. She had been perfectly fine just moments ago, so why this sudden deterioration? Adrian also knelt down beside Lulu, pressing his ear close and listening carefully. After a moment, a look of delighted surprise crossed his face. He announced loudly, offering his congratulations to Lady Marian. Lulu was pregnant, but Marian's brow furrowed deeply.